Living in a post-industrial city in Romania, I have contact with different non-human animals in public spaces. Despite the rapidly modernizing urban landscape, some of them are still here. There are many birds such as crows, pigeons, sparrows and tits, but also other animals who share their territories with me. In the night I see dogs passing the crosswalk, and during the day I see neighboring cats jumping over fences. And there are many other animals I don't notice, who are smaller or better at hiding.
Whether you see us, whether you know us, whether you like us or you despise us, this place you call we call home too.
The modern city is unkind to many liminal animals, unfortunately, and they struggle to find a place in it. In the touristifying landscape where I live, many of them are framed as a surplus in need of control. Configuring them as such happens when certain aspects of their existence are highlighted only to be essentialized as problems, while others are invisibilized. So on one hand, different normal and natural processes such as moving, breathing and defecating are problematized. On the other hand, their cultures, social bonds and individual experiences are erased from view. In this way, from co-inhabitants of the land, urban animals become dirty, dangerous, and useless beings. As Claudia Hirtenfelder points out in her work, they are constructed as problems in need of regulation. These configurations are shaped by power relations spanning across societal norms, economic interests, and human values. And they are a way of fabricating particular anthropocentric urban natures through the violent negation and erasure of others. The sight of a cat in heat, pigeons defecating, and perhaps the most scorned of all, rats running loose, are all viewed with disdain. Many urban animals are seen as dangers to be dealt with and as hazards to humans, to buildings, to nature, and sometimes even to themselves. There's rarely a place for them in the visions put forward. They either become pests to be eradicated or pets to be owned. Within contemporary industrial capitalist systems, non-human animals who live around us are generally regarded as impediments. They become risky and menacing obstacles to human and capital development, or, in a romanticized view of it, to nature. So, speaking of them as vermin, pests, or strays is both a historical and a political matter. It is a matter of constructing these animals specifically as problem animals. In this way, urban animals become governable. They can be subjected to control, discipline, containment, and eradication. Thus, the civilizing quest to determine who belongs where and to purify the city of its more than human inhabitants can be carried out. There are still other ways of looking. One of the reasons urban animals are so often seen as transgressive and criminal has to do with the fact that their ways of living are denaturalized. So, understanding their social and territorial relations differently is important. Think of pigeons and dogs. They seem totally different, right? Still, pigeons and dogs can be somewhat alike. When residing in an urban setting, adapting to it for a longer period of time, both can be thought of as living in a synanthropic or commensal relationship. These two terms can be used interchangeably when referring to animals who live in urban areas or around human structures. But there are also nuances. A synanthropic relationship points to animals who live close to human settlements, adapting to the anthropic landscape. However, a commensal form of living can reveal something particular within the former relationship. It can point to animals who benefit or rely on discarded food scraps from humans, and not simply to those who live around us, unbothered by the proximity. When scavenging for food in our immediate surroundings, both some pigeon and dog populations can be seen in this way. Seeing them differently is also a matter of understanding the malleability of terms such as domestic, wild, and synanthropic. As Terry O'Connor argues, these labels are more properly applied when they refer to particular animal groups, not when they are utilized at the species level. When considering sheep and wolves side by side, it is easy to assume that some species are domestic and some are wild. However, thinking of pigeons undermines this logic. This shows us that these categories only make sense at the population level, not at the species one. It is the relationship that matters. Depending on the context, pigeons may be considered domestic as homing pigeons, but also commensal scavengers in urban environments, or even wild animals when living as self-sustaining rock doves. O'Connor points out that in some places, such as north of European Alps, it is also hard to tell wild from commensal populations. When you think about it, there is no reason to assume that this fluidity applies exclusively to pigeons. Other animal populations also vary across the globe, and they can blur rigid classifications at the species level. The differences between how they live and relate to humans challenges us to think more thoughtfully about how we end up describing them. Let's consider dogs. Dogs' evolutionary history is not as straightforward as one might think. Contrary to what is generally assumed about domestication, different theories seem to show that wolves acted more on their own terms. According to a well-known theory, it all began when wolves started scavenging human scraps from refuse dumps. It is believed that these self-taming wolves evolved into dogs through a process of natural selection, by adapting to the new ecological niche unknowingly created by humans. But there are other stories too, about how dogs became dogs, and some of them criticize this narrative. By drawing from indigenous accounts, some authors have pointed out the opposite, that humans might not have been able to pull it through without scavenging kills made by wolves. Their theory stresses how indigenous peoples saw wolves as teachers and guides, and speaks of the cooperative aspect of their relations. From this perspective, domestication is thought to have resulted from a co-evolutionary relationship initiated by wolves. By only thinking about how they live in contemporary societies in the global north, it is easy to overlook that for a very long time, dogs moved relatively freely up until the 19th century, even in the West, and also that, on a global scale, most of them still do. Over the last 200 years, dogs in public spaces have increasingly become a symbol of cultural backwardness for self-proclaimed civilized cities in the West, as historian Chris Pearson shows. Yet, even today, not everyone shares this perception, and it was never universally held. The view that dogs should be strictly controlled and not allowed to move freely, born within the metropolis of imperial and colonial powers, spread from Western Europe and North America to other parts of the world. This view continues to mold their lives and our relations with dogs in many places today. Still, dogs who are confined in a human home and are reproductively controlled are a minority worldwide. While most dogs in the West are strictly restrained nowadays, in other parts of the world, dogs adopt a commensal lifestyle. Thus, Their populations can have different social and territorial relationships, depending on how and where they live. Compared to pets, these dogs, who can be seen as living in a synanthropic relationship, are not directly dependent on humans. Nevertheless, since they live in human-altered environments, they may rely on specific features of the ecological niche. This can include things like leftover food from humans, or certain spatial configurations and cultural attitudes towards them. Some animals who make the city their home have shared their territories with us for a very long time. Sadly, this does not spare them from human hostilities. While some storks, squirrels, or songbirds may be welcome in different cities, many synanthropes are feared, ignored, and profoundly hated. Cultural attitudes play a huge role in how these liminal animals are perceived. Rats, for instance, are typically framed in negative terms. Thus, poison traps are scattered all over many of our cities, and they are not the only ones seen in a negative light. Bats, slugs, and cockroaches are regarded with disdain too. And street pigeons and dogs, if not outright hated, can also raise people's eyebrows, especially in the global north or in newly urbanized and gentrified places. Thus, the topic of overpopulation dominates the discourse about them and about other non-human neighbors deemed a threat to the sanitized city. Even when their populations are far from exceeding the limits of their ecological niche, or when they are shrinking compared to other periods, they are still objectified as a surplus. The interventions that target them are not usually or mainly aimed at caring for their quality of life, nor for their health, but at removing them or shrinking their populations one way or another. That is the main objective. Synanthropes are often blamed for different things, including for human-made ecological problems. And once the panic is set, it becomes harder for people to appreciate them as individuals, or to see that synanthropes can play an important role in urban ecology. Rats, for instance, could be involved in preventing serious phenomena, such as the rotting of organic material, and thus in controlling the proliferation of microbes. And there was a time when street dogs in some parts of the world were more than tolerated for maintaining public hygiene through waste consumption. Still, whether or not liminal animals are beneficial for urban ecology, this shouldn't be seen only through this lens. After all, we should always question the idea that a being, human or not, is worthy only when others can benefit from them. The city automatically becomes a multi-species landscape when we challenge modern purified visions of it. Understanding some of our non-human neighbors as synanthropes positions them as co-inhabitants of the land, rather than as intruders. But how do we trouble the pejorative labels many urban animals receive? While synanthropes adapt to anthropic spaces, they also challenge humanist understandings. By acknowledging their agency, we can give a positive spin to the negative connotations affecting them. Speaking of urban animals as subjects who resist being controlled and who have plans of their own, rather than seeing them as objects of intervention, is an important aspect in doing justice to them. Think for a moment about what it means to stray. This is a term that has negative connotations for cats and dogs. Depending on where you live, you might have a clear picture of what straying implies. However, because legal practices and cultural understandings vary across the globe, it is never quite clear when a cat or a dog is straying. Seeing village dogs or neighborhood cats as strays is a way of marking them as a problem or as a mistake, something to be solved and fixed. Whether they are seen as unowned, undesirable, intrusive, lost, or abandoned, strays are generally considered unruly animals in need of strict regulation. They are seen as transgressing their proper role and place in society, either by choice or human negligence. But what is their so-called proper place and role? The answer, of course, depends on whom one asks. Not only does it vary culturally, it varies with time, and from human to non-human animals. In Romania, for instance, cats and dogs who move freely outside the house are not necessarily seen as strays by everyone. While local understandings have been shifting fast in the last few years, freedom to roam might still be considered something normal and natural by at least some humans, which is rarely the case in most Western countries. So what is straying all about, if we understand it critically? Let's stop for a second to think about street dogs. Historical changes and cultural attitudes that led to the widespread practice of pet ownership in the West also shaped how dogs who moved freely came to be seen. It was through comparisons with pedigree dogs that street dogs came to be perceived as less evolved. As Chris Pearson shows, they were increasingly depicted in this way through an unsettling entanglement between dog breeding, racism, eugenics, and nationalism. Similarly, their more autonomous lives became less civilized by comparison to those of pets. From a Western perspective, free-roaming dogs came to be known as strays. They become governable entities to be removed from public spaces. Historical and cultural geographer Philip Howell calls the stray category nothing more but a legal and spatial construction. The category itself refers to dogs who are rendered as out of place. And it is shaped by its roots in colonial visions and understandings. Past and present attempts to civilize particular relations with dogs at home and abroad can make this visible. Dogs who are labeled as strays by tourists in different regions may not, after all, be seen that way through other local understandings. If we consider the diverse lives dogs have worldwide, the normality attached to certain practices of pet ownership becomes a sign of cultural imperialism. Let me tell you a story about someone I know, someone I like, and who likes me back. His name is Labush. He is a dog from Romania, whose mobility isn't strictly controlled, and who doesn't wear a collar. Because of this, Labush can be considered a stray. Authorities, tourists, and affluent neighbors, or resentful ones, could see him as such. Yet, by at least some local understandings, he's not a lost or abandoned dog, nor is he unwelcome. When he steps outside his yard, he becomes part of the neighborhood, while such views are casted solely in a negative light, usually by those with economic privilege. Older people might still share them. Contrary to usual depictions of stray dogs on social media, Labush is healthy, and happy. Not only does he have a reserved spot within a particular domestic space, he has humans in his life who care for him in various ways. Moreover, Labush has a good understanding of the surrounding area. He crosses the street safely and avoids cars or humans who are not looking for interactions. Simply put, he knows how to take care of himself and steer clear of trouble. Even before the elderly lady who cared for him moved, Labush could be spotted outside from time to time. However, since her property became a construction site for a future house, the workers leave him outside more often. But this isn't the only reason why Labush can be spotted outside, which is sufficient enough to label him as out of place. He also willingly chooses to go out. He follows the workers, he greets the human and non-human neighbors in the region, and he enjoys resting on the sidewalk in front of the house. Aside from a few non-threatening barks, signaling his presence, Labush can't be said to cause any disturbance to anyone. Yet, his existence could be marked as disturbing, and it can be depicted as such by people who know absolutely nothing about him or the neighborhood, which is his extended home and family. Within capitalist urban formations, La Bouche is just another case of an improperly and irresponsibly owned pet. As the human boundaries drawn around private property are no longer well defined, his status becomes unclear. He either becomes an intruder in need of correction or a poor dog who does not know what is best for him, which clearly isn't the case. Different legal and spatial configurations mark him as a stray in need of control. How can we resist this dominant narrative? How can we do justice to him as a subject? A more politicized way of looking is to reframe the official discourse. This means seeing straying through a different lens. For our human-centered institutions, straying is something negative. But for La Bouche, straying is a way of life, through which he does not simply accept being petified, commodified, and strictly controlled. So, from a non-anthropocentric activist perspective, straying can be subversive. Rather than marking dogs, cats, or escaped and abused farmed animals as objects to be governed, it can draw attention to them as subjects with agency. Changing the meaning of words brings other experiences and realities forward. Straying can also be thought of in more general terms. Within the prevailing discourse, stray animals are regularly framed as perturbing public order. But human actions can also be criminalized when resisting the state's power. So straying can be seen as a form of defiance, connecting us politically with other animals. It can be an act of refusal to be assimilated or to be reduced to a prescribed social role. When we see it like this, straying takes on an entirely new meaning. It naturally becomes empowering rather than degrading. Thus, its negative associations are transformed into a cross-species act of revolt, and seen through an expansive multi-species understanding of struggle. It becomes a way of moving beyond present imaginaries. Straying becomes a form of disobedience, a way of going against the status quo.
We've been standing and moving. Don't call us out of place. We don't need you approving. We've always been here. This place you call home is our home too.
We have seen how we can change the narrative. But how do we move from seeing urban animals differently to acting differently? It is not enough to understand their daily actions from a less anthropocentric angle. We need to actively take their agency into account to build more just futures. So, how do we live more justly together? Can we support urban animals in their projects while also taking into account the dangers of our exclusionary, human-centered landscapes? Is there a way to empower them not only to shape future political structures, but also to challenge existing ones, without exposing them to more hostility and anthropogenic pressures? These are complicated questions, and to complicate things even more, the answers cannot come solely from us. We need to consider different contexts and the urban animals we are trying to support in them. And we need to have exchanges with our non-human neighbors, centering their voices and ways of living, if we are to do justice to them. Reimagining present and future political communities with other animals is a challenging task. However, by drawing from the work of political theorists Stu Donaldson and Will Kymlicka, we can understand urban animals as having their own self-governing political communities, while also sharing a territory in common with us, and with many other animals. Doing justice to them would require us to find ways to coexist within the same territory, while respecting that our non-human neighbors have their own norms and ways of navigating social life. So, how do we negotiate different aspects of living together when we hold different ideas of what is good? That's the work of doing politics. And other animals do, in fact, speak and act politically, as philosopher and artist Eva Meyer shows us. They have their own pathways to express and to create meaning, be it individually or collectively, through different modalities of being in the world. In their work on animal languages, Eva Meyer points out that the distinction between species does not stand in the way of understanding. Rather, it is just one characteristic among many others that influences how meaning comes into being. So, interactions between humans and other animals not only happen within a shared universe of meaning making, but can also lead to new meanings and understandings. More so, they can lead to new material configurations. Having different exchanges across time and space with urban animals can be a way to engage politically with them. If we pay close attention, we can notice that many of our non-human neighbors do in fact challenge the wrongs done to them, but they do so in ways that are not recognized as legitimate. In a case study, Eva Meyer discusses how geese who persistently claim up a space for them or return to an area where they are not wanted contest human supremacy and how the land is occupied. Similarly, with their presence, cats and dogs in my vicinity also defy particular anthropocentric norms and laws affecting their lives. They might also reject unfamiliar touches, run away, scratch humans, bark at cars, or fight against being caught. Surely, they don't use words to make their case visible in the hegemonic political discourse, but they are not passive beings affected by human development. Urban animals challenge how the spaces we co-share are governed by disregarding particular arrangements. They vote with their feet when facing hostility or adverse conditions and protest human orders by physically occupying different locations. And if their views are constantly trampled over, they might resort to using their teeth. Either way, one thing is certain: they do push back against harms done to them. And they stand against anthropocentric claims to exclusive human ownership of territory. These more than human ways of engaging politically emerge from specific contexts. While we can try to represent them in our political structures, speaking for others generally falls short in terms of doing justice to them. Self-representation is not only important for humans, it matters for other animals too. So, how can we do justice to their concerns or respond to matters of collective concern? How can we do politics together? Drawing inspiration from anarchist and indigenous thought and practices, Eva Meyer sketches a model from which we can start. They suggest we begin by forming multi-species assemblies. Through them, collective concerns can be explored and decided upon, together with other beings. Some humans might think this is not viable, nor essential, or that it is impossible to communicate with other animals and understand them, let alone have political exchanges with them. But Eva Meyer points out how this skepticism is rooted in a form of speciesism. It is one way in which particular societies and institutions silence embodied ways of engaging and exchanging information. It is not an objective truth to regard other beings as voiceless, but a humanist construction with a particular colonial history. Meaning for Meyer emerges through different modes of being in the world. Embodied interactions, along with the social and material configurations in which they take place, are what matters when we try to understand one another, human or non-human. Multi-species assemblies can offer us a way of navigating different conceptions of what is good. They can include various beings, from non-human animals to other life forms, such as plants, but also human children or the generations to come. Most of these beings are typically left outside of decision-making processes today, because the adult neurotypical human is seen as the only legitimate being to decide or drive change. However, by living and relating differently with others, and by addressing individual and collective concerns from the bottom up, we can help our non-human neighbors lead the way towards other arrangements. It is about taking the matters into the hands and paws and branches of local beings. The model that Eva Meyer proposes can provide a pathway to navigate present relations of domination carefully. It not only fosters inclusivity and reconfigures decision-making processes to embrace other animals, but it can give more precedence to self-representation and horizontal and non-hierarchical forms of shaping our collective lives. Multi-species assemblies can play a vital role in doing justice to urban animals. For instance, they can influence local communities to move farther away from anthropocentric values and nurture more welcoming and just arrangements in exchange. It goes without saying that different urban spaces bring different problems for the non-human animals inhabiting them. So, paying close attention to some of the challenges they face in their territories can be one way to initiate an assembly. But urban animals may also express their disapproval of certain local practices, indicating the need for an assembly, intentionally or unintentionally. Think of an abandoned site, or one intended for a future building. Uninhabited by humans for a long time, the quiet space might be frequently visited by neighborhood dogs and cats. Although birds, rodents, and reptiles might also find it to be a good spot. Cats, for example, might see the unused pile of sand at the site as a place to relieve themselves, while dogs would eagerly come to search for daily surprises. Once the construction site is transformed into a paved area populated by unfamiliar and noisy humans, their daily routine would be affected. Thus, cats would be forced to use the neighboring sand from children's playgrounds or humans' vegetable gardens for the same purpose. Not only this will not be cleaned by dogs, but it would inevitably lead to conflicts with humans. More so, in the absence of a better alternative in the neighborhood, dogs may also start using the sidewalk more often to relieve themselves. In this sense, through the daily actions of our non-human neighbors, a local issue might become visible. A new construction and the removal of unpaved land or of the space other animals enjoyed and relied on for different purposes in the neighborhood could bring forward different conflicts and questions that will need to be addressed collectively. Once these are signaled out, the assembly can be assessed and guided by a group of human and non-human facilitators. These actors will unpack the issues and questions at stake. Their role will be to assess who is impacted, who can participate, and in what way interactions can unfold among other things, trying to make sense of the process. When the scope becomes clearer, those who make up the assembly will deliberate on the problems at stake. Some dialogues will happen by the use of words, but there will also be embodied forms of communication and material interventions leading to a decision. Perhaps there's a particular kind of sand that the cats liked, an old building or a quiet space that many other beings enjoyed. All of these aspects will need to be investigated and tested out through different social and material interventions. In many instances, and in the beginning, certain decisions will only steer the process of solving a particular issue at stake, rather than offer a final conclusion. But after a while, the assembly could be dissolved if there's no need for ongoing deliberations. Eva Mayer brings attention to multiple aspects in their work to better understand the contours of these multi-species assemblies. Some assemblies can be short-term, for instance, oriented on a particular issue, perhaps similar to our previous example. Others can be long-term, maintaining regular or irregular interactions to deliberate on shared concerns. Assemblies can also be very different from one context to another, so reflecting over their duration and scope and re-evaluating them periodically is a crucial aspect, as their meaning and political purpose can change over time with the involvement of other beings. It is important to ensure that others are equally considered in the process as well, instead of rushing to conclusions. And so is to anchor the assembly in a precise location, as deciding with more than human others starts from situated engagements. Multi-species assemblies should consider the various rhythms of life experienced by other beings involved, and stay away from bureaucracy. Eva Mayer speaks about getting to know others ethically, bending hierarchies through play, conversations that don't revolve around words, and embracing the messiness of experimenting with alternative ways of living and organizing, found in anarchist thought. They notice how different ways of relating can lead to different knowledges. While human assemblies ran into different challenges in previous movements, multi-species assemblies can spark a transformative process that goes beyond the current paradigm of speaking for other animals around us. Engaging in decision-making processes with other animals in ways that are more horizontal can certainly look like a stretch into other possible futures. However, it is not about a distant utopia that Eva Mayer speaks about, but about gradually transforming the gardens, the streets, and the neighborhoods in which we already live, by engaging politically with other animals. Surely, it requires imagination and openness from us to other ways of doing politics, and it is about attuning to different timescales, languages, and more than human ways of being. But by changing cultural attitudes and practices within the city, in our surroundings, there is a way to resist its exclusiveness and violence. There is a way to move forward in the here and now. Other animals already make the city their home. They are here with us on its alleys and narrow pathways, and they will always be in some ways. We only need to make the public space a little bit safer, more welcoming and respectful towards more than human ways of living, and to include those around us in how we are going to do this. By experimenting with multi-species assemblies, we get to learn how to be on other animals' side. We get to speak with them, not for them. We get to take part in a dialogue that twists and turns, carving out a space that ripples with time.
To get to see us, oh, you'll need to look. To get to hear us, listen. To get to grasp us, you'll need to be silent. Be still.